It was New Year's Eve, and my work cell phone rang, and I was annoyed, but I answered it. And my friends immediately started teasing me that I was running a gay crisis hotline. But when I answered, I heard this scared kid, and he said, "My name is Sean. My dad kicked me out because I'm gay, and I don't know anyone. Please don't hang up on me." So I listened patiently as Sean told me his story, which unfortunately was not unique to me. On his 18th birthday, Sean's dad said, "No son of mine is going to be like that and live in this house, so pack your bags." He drove Sean down to Charleston from Delaware so that he could be homeless in a warm climate. He said it was because he loved him. So Sean still had a whole year left of high school, if that puts it into context for you. But here he was abandoned, and he's freezing, and he's terrified of the older guys who were calling him the F word. You know the one, it rhymes with maggot. And I could hear them threatening to kick his ass in the background. And at that point, I was no longer annoyed at getting a work call on a holiday, because for me, I was still having fun hanging out with my friends and with my family. For Sean, it was the harsh realization that he no longer had a family. He was in a place where he didn't have even one friend, and he no longer had a home. So I started to think, how many numbers did this kid call before he got to mine? And I said, "Sean, I'm so happy that you called me. How did you even get my number?" And he said, "Oh, I got it off these traveler kids as they were hitchhiking to California." Traveler kids are youth in the homeless community who form really, really tight, chosen family bonds. They travel around the country from city to city. At the time, I was running the one and only organization in the entire state that works with LGBTQ youth. So when you are one organization carrying critical work for a state, word travels quickly. This is actually an example of why South Carolina ranks dead last when it comes to dealing with youth homelessness. When you're young and you're gay and you're homeless like Sean, you kind of just disappear into the background. Kids who are under 18, they barely have any rights at all. Take Charles. He's a transgender guy, and when he was 14, he got locked up in the juvenile justice system. After he served his time, we looked around the entire state and tried to find a group home that would take them, but none of the homes would take him because of his gender identity. So he got placed in a psychiatric ward, and while he was there, he was put in isolation, and he just sat there in a holding pattern, just waiting for a home. Both of these institutions have a history of isolating LGBTQ youth, and they say it's for their own protection, but forced isolation is the severest form of punishment. And these kids, they get locked up when they don't have a home for these things that wouldn't be crimes if they were adults, like skipping school. But they also get criminalized for life-sustaining activities like sitting in public, sleeping in public, begging for money in public. But when you do not have a home, everything you do has to be in public. So remember that when you're walking down a city street and you come across a group of young people, they might be asking you for money and they might be flying signs that say, "I'm homeless and I'm hungry." Research out of the Williams Institute tells us that about 2 out of every 5 of those young people identifies as lesbian or gay or bisexual or transgender or queer, or I could go on. Now, they only make up a small minority of the general youth population. So while they make up about 10% of the entire population of youth, they can represent up to 40% of all youth experiencing homelessness. And that is a huge disparity. And the number one reason they end up on the streets is rejection in the home. Home is so much more than just a roof and 4 walls, isn't it? Home is a soft place to fall. Hopefully you feel protected there, and hopefully you're loved there. I used to think that love was just a feeling, but then I discovered Bell Hooks, who's an amazing scholar and author who writes about privilege and oppression, and she defines love as a verb, not as a noun. It's a very active thing, not a passive thing. So when I began thinking about it that way, I realized that when we're rejecting our LGBTQ young people or attempting to change who they are, we're not really loving them in those moments. That is a form of rejection. That is a form of erasure, and that is a form of abuse that's so normalized in our culture that we don't even recognize it as abuse. It starts with, I love you, but I wish you were more masculine. I love you, but you're going to hell. I love you, but please don't put your sexuality in my face, and please don't tell anyone you're gay. I love you, but you are not a she, so I refuse to call you she. I love you, but you cannot live in this house if you're transgender. The words I love you are instantly canceled out when you follow them with the word but. I remember this bright and bubbly teenager named Mila. Her family sent her to an ex-gay ministry, ex-gay conversion camp when they found out she was transgender. If you've never heard of ex-gay conversion therapy or reparative therapy, it's based on the premise that being LGBTQ is some form of defect that needs to be fixed, or it's some kind of disease that needs a cure. You may have heard of some of the things they used to do, like inducing vomiting or inflicting pain or some kind of negative stimulus after showing a person homoerotic images, or using shame in an attempt to change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity. At best, these programs don't work. But at their worst, they cause irreparable damage to a person's psyche. And when Mila was going through it, she was conditioned to hate herself, so she ran away from that place. But she could never run away from who she was. She ended up in a cycle of hunger and homelessness and survival sex, and then she became addicted to drugs just to get through the day and be able to make it. So many of the things that are done to LGBTQ young people in the name of loving them, in the name of helping them or healing them or delivering therapy to them or protecting them are actually punishments. We are still punishing LGBTQ people in 2019. Now, you may be sitting there thinking to yourselves, that's horrible, these systems are terrible, and these parents are horrible for kicking their kids out, but what can I do about it? And you might feel absolved from doing anything to solve the problem. Or you may be sitting there thinking that you don't agree with LGBTQ identity, and maybe they're getting what they deserve. But each and every one of us has a role to play in ending this type of homelessness. What these young people need are social supports, not criminalization. On the systems level, we could ban conversion therapy in all of its forms. We could divest from youth incarceration and invest in youth leadership. Decriminalize the things that young people have to do to survive on the streets, and allow the youngest ones to get the life-saving support that they need without getting all tied up in the court systems. Allow the young people to tell us where they would feel safest and most protected, rather than forcing them into isolation or forcing them to live in gendered spaces that don't match their gender identities. Public policy around these issues should be shaped by the young people who have to live with the consequences of the policies. We need to expand our definition of homelessness to include couch surfing, or honestly to cover any young person that doesn't have a stable nighttime residence. A young person should not have to sleep on the street in order to get help. The longer they're out there, the worse it is for them. So on the individual level, make room for LGBTQ young people to tell you who they are and believe and support them when they tell you. If you can do that, you might make an excellent foster parent. But a word of warning, in South Carolina, you could be turned away by state-funded agencies on the basis of your sexual orientation or gender identity or even religion. Support, celebrate, affirm, and love the LGBTQ people in your lives and in your families. Make that the rule and not the exception. We can start by saying, I love you and I love all of you. I love you and you are exactly who you're supposed to be. I love you and I see you. I love you and I respect your name and your pronouns. I love you and I will support you in any way you need support.